So, I saw an article recently where they were interviewing the director of Star Wars Rebels, and this season, apparently, I haven't watched it, they're putting Thrawn in. So, Thrawn is a major character now, and he's gone from being in what they call the old canon, Legends, into the new canon. So, he is officially in the new canon now. And the director said he couldn't, believe how much Thrawn meant to the fans. And to a lot of people, when you talk about the extended universe, there's kind of two characters that come up. There's Grand Admiral Thrawn and Revan, and together with Palpatine and maybe Darth Vader, I'd say these are probably the most popular characters in the fandom. But yeah, Thrawn means a lot to the fans. He's an overwhelming number of people's favorite character. People find him absolutely fascinating. I remember, I think this is something a lot of Star Wars fans had. When they saw Return of the Jedi, they're like, okay, what happens next? They killed the Emperor. There's still a whole empire there. There's still all these ships. There's still all these things happening. And what for the longest time, what people considered to be episodes 7, 8, 9 were the Thrawn trilogy. Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. And for a lot of people, that was 7, 8, 9. And when they announced the new movies, a lot of people were like, oh, they're going to do the Thrawn trilogy. That's going to be the sequel. So, even people who aren't that big a fan of the extended universe, a lot of them know who Grand Admiral Thrawn is. And people just like him. There's something and I'll go into detail about it, just utterly fascinating about the man. So before we get into the biography, let's just talk about why Thrawn is so beloved. In kind of the original trilogy, pretty much everybody in the Empire was kind of a sadistic nut or a sociopath. They blew planets up, they bombed civilian stuff, they destroyed Alderaan, and they killed the 6 million there, even though they apparently didn't have any weapons. The Empire was shown to be corrupt, cruel, and irredeemably evil. And what kind of happened with Thrawn is when he comes in the original canon, he came in as he had been out in the unknown regions, and after Palpatine died, and after there'd been a Imperial Civil War for a couple of years, he came back. And with Thrawn, we really see for the first time a sympathetic Imperial character. We see someone who is not just the villain, but someone who represents a completely different ideology and worldview. Whereas before, the Empire was just unsympathetic because they were evil and crazy, Thrawn represents order, hierarchy, meritocracy, honor, duty, in contrast to kind of the individualism, democracy, open-ended freedom, and all the kind of things the rebels do. So it was really the first time that we saw an Imperial character kind of display a coherent and interesting ideology and worldview. And I think a lot of people were wanting to like the Empire. You know, it's a bit like in Terminator 2, everybody loved Arnold, so they brought Arnold back, but they made him the good guy. Because you wanted to cheer for him in the first movie because the Terminator's awesome. But you couldn't because he was evil. So they decided to bring him back as the good guy, and that's kind of what they did with Thrawn. He's presented as, like I said, being the antithesis of them, but not evil in the same way. I remember Timothy Zahn said for the villain of the Thrawn trilogy, he wanted to make a character who was a career military man. Not a politician, not a Sith, but someone who saw the world from a kind of a purely military standpoint. So I think to kind of get into Thrawn, I'm going to start going into the biography. So if you have not read it, I recommend go buy it now. The book Thrawn by Timothy Zahn. So they brought Timothy Zahn back to write a complete biography of Grand Admiral Thrawn for the new canon. And I gotta admit, it's amazing. It's just really good. The side characters are also really good. Colonel Yularen, I can never figure out how to pronounce her name. Governor Price. I love Ensign Eli Vanto. He's awesome. But it's just a great book. I highly recommend getting the audiobook version. And if ever you want to read a Star Wars book, I recommend the audiobook versions because they put more effort into them than a lot of audiobooks. They have like music, they have the Star Wars music, they have sound effects, they have Thrawn's theme song. They'll often have multiple people doing it. They're very good, well produced audiobooks. So there's going to be a ton of spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, leave now. Okay, now that's just us. So I'm not entirely sure in the new canon, and I'm going to be mixing them together. But kind of the overriding goal of Thrawn's life is when he was... Okay, so Thrawn is a Chiss. Let's just go back. Thrawn is a member of the Chiss Ascendancy. The Chiss are a group of human colonists who kind of wound up in the middle of the unknown regions, and they live on an ice world. Their skin and eyes changed color because of the particles in their atmosphere, but they're very close to humans. They're not even really a near human species. They're pretty much a subspecies of humans. In contrast to humans, they're quite similar. They have a much higher metabolism, so they live about 20 years shorter than humans, but they are much more intelligent. The Chiss are known for being extremely isolationist, to the point of almost being pacifists. They really just don't like getting involved with the rest of the galaxy. And because they live in the unknown regions, which is just a roiling mess of chaos, pirates, that kind of thing, the Chiss Ascendancy is the sole kind of bastion of order. So when he was kind of in the Chiss military, what Grand Admiral Thrawn was scouting around, and he discovered there was a race called the Vong, the Yuvon Vong or whatever, and they were an extragalactic race that came from another galaxy which they had destroyed, and they had just begun to arrive, and he realized that they had enough firepower and weaponry to basically wipe out the galaxy. And in particular, because the Chiss Ascendancy was in the middle of the unknown regions, his people were going to be the first in their path. And so he basically, him and the Chiss High Command, and we're getting into the new canon now, looked around and they said, okay, the entire galaxy is doomed. We need to find something strong enough to unite the galaxy and to produce the military might necessary to stop the Vong and to save everybody. So Thrawn and the Chiss were able to determine that the only institution that could possibly stand up to the Vong is the Empire, with its super weapons, its capital ships, its centralized command structure. And so in the new canon, what Thrawn does is him and the Chiss High Command basically pretend to exile him, and they send him to a forest world, and they set up like a fake distress beacon, and their whole goal is to lure an Imperial ship there. Because during the Clone Wars, Thrawn had some experience with Anakin Skywalker, and he believes that Anakin will vouch for him if he can just make it to the Emperor and talk to him. So an Imperial landing party lands on the planet where he's kind of hiding and pretending to be in exile. And using his tactical genius, Thrawn succeeds in defeating the entire Imperial... Well, not defeating them, but killing several stormtroopers, stealing aboard the ship. And the captain, or whatever it was, I think it was Admiral, captures him, and he's so impressed by Thrawn's ability that rather than kill him, he decides to take him to the Emperor. And the Emperor, hearing tales from Anakin, aka Darth Vader, and being extremely impressed with Thrawn, basically offers him, if he can, a chance to prove himself. So Thrawn goes through military academy, where he's abused for being a near human. He goes through just countless, and the Book of Thrawn is just him solving situation after situation, problem after problem, just winning despite the political and military threats against him. And he just gets rapidly promoted throughout the book to eventually become a Grand Admiral. A Grand Admiral is kind of like a Field Marshal. A field marshal is the highest command in any army. I guess they have generalissimo, or they'll have a president, but a field marshal is in charge of a theater. So, like during World War II, Douglas MacArthur was a field marshal, and he was in charge of the Pacific Theater. So, and the other thing is a field marshal has a baton that they're given, which is a symbol of their command. It's normally made out of wood or some precious, like onyx or something, and decorated with precious stones and gold. And Grand Admirals also get them. They also are allowed to wear white uniforms, which is kind of distinct because in the Imperial Navy, everyone wears kind of minimalist, very gray, brown uniforms to try to de-emphasize individuality. So I think the book Thrawn really kind of gets into the personality of the man. Because Thrawn, as he states at the beginning, his goals are to protect his people. He wants to serve the Empire. He wants to make the Empire stronger so that he can prove... It's kind of a couple different levels of it. He wants to prove that the Chiss are a valuable asset and kind of seek an alliance with the Empire, so the Empire will help them when the Vong shows up. He also wants to make sure that the Empire's strong. He wants to deal with the nascent rebel alliance, to deal with all manner of problems like that, so that the Empire will be strong when the Vong come. But more than that, there's another aspect of Thrawn that I think can be easily overlooked because he is a very cold person. And I don't mean cold and like that he's uncaring. He just is very calm and very reflexive. Thrawn is a deeply compassionate individual. He has a leadership style that's extremely different from any Imperial commander we had seen before, and we see this even in the Thrawn trilogy. As opposed to Vader and Tarkin, who ruled through fear and regularly executed their crew, Thrawn sought to lead by example. He tried to rouse his men, to encourage them, One of his things is he never risked the lives of his men without purpose. He always took care to minimize Imperial casualties. He never sent them in unless he would go in himself with his Imperial Star Destroyer. He took care of his men, and he treated them with respect and decency. And because of that, his men loved him, and they were willing to die for him, not out of fear, but out of respect and loyalty. And in the original trilogy, despite having a very small force because the Imperial warlords were squabbling and wouldn't give him any troops, his followers were absolutely disciplined and committed to his cause and were willing to die for it. And he found that a lot more efficient and a lot more conducive to victory and stability than ruling through terror. And that's part of kind of why he was sympathetic. And another part of Thrawn's leadership is he doesn't really have any respect for, I guess you could say, species, background, that kind of thing. He only really views the world in terms of logic and resources. And it doesn't matter where an idea comes from. He would encourage his officers to challenge him. I mean, so long as they obeyed when the orders came. But if an officer would be like, Grand Admiral, I was in a situation like this before, this is what we did, or this was the lesson we learned, he would appreciate that. He'd take that into account. He would praise the officer. He even, in the original trilogy, he promoted a ensign who had tried a creative technique but failed for at least putting in an effort and for being able to react under pressure. And yeah, that was kind of his command style. And a lot of people found it very odd, particularly the Imperial Navy. But once again, people loved him for it. So in terms of Thrawn as a strategist, Thrawn is kind of a combination of Sun Tzu, Sherlock Holmes, and Hannibal. And he kind of combines a lot of the greatest strategists in history. Thrawn's, I suppose you could say the core of his military maxim is he really has taken to heart Sun Tzu's know yourself and know your enemy. In particular, knowing your enemy. Most of Thrawn's strategies are based on getting a psychological profile of his enemy and and being able to predict what they're going to do in order to beat them. And that's kind of why he's such an effective commander, because he's able to predict what his enemies are going to do, and he's also good at coming up with his own clever plans. So kind of through a combination of the both, he can pretty much prevail in every battle. And you see this time and time again throughout the Thrawn book, is he's able to predict what his enemies do. He's able to take one step ahead of them, and he's always able to win. And probably the aspect of this that he's the best known for is his studying of art. Thrawn is extremely interested and fascinated in artwork. He has a huge collection of art, and particularly holo art. In the original trilogy, he had huge quarters, and it was just full of holographic art. Because he believes that if he studies the art of a species or a culture, he can gain insights into that culture. And he can predict the behavior of members of that culture and their battle tactics based on studying their art and that sort of thing. So before any fight, Thrawn always would do a lot of due diligence. He would study the opponents he would be going up against. He'd study their culture. He'd study previous battles. He'd try and get inside of their heads, and his battle plans would be based off of that. And a lot of people found that really weird in the Imperial Navy, because they were very much used to just going by the book and prevailing through massive amounts of firepower and casualties. But Thrawn really didn't like to do that. He didn't like to needlessly waste the lives of his men, and once again, that's part of why they loved him so dearly, was because unlike most Imperial generals, he actively took care of them. Another thing I think is important to keep in mind is, and this partially comes, I think Thrawn is naturally a compassionate person, but also just from his belief that resources matter, is he really despises unnecessary death. In the book Thrawn, he's very much willing to accept surrenders under favorable terms, pardon people who commit minor crimes, or otherwise just try to avoid direct conflict. And I think that's another aspect of Sun Tzu's Art of War. The greatest victory is to win without fighting. And whenever Thrawn engages in any of his operations, saving the lives of innocents always comes first. Like in one of his first victories in the book Thrawn, is he chooses to save the crew of a freighter as opposed to the cargo of the freighter. And the cargo of the freighter is extremely valuable, but he values human life, in particular innocent human life, a lot more than he values cargo, because he sees that can be replaced, but people are worth a lot more. And you just kind of see this all throughout the book Thrawn, and through his other kind of achievements, is he's just, if Thrawn kills somebody, he does it only because he has to and only as a last resort. He much prefers to get his enemies to give up or to neutralize them in other ways. I think in part because there's always an element of chance to combat. Even with his strategies, they might get a lucky shot in and hit his Star Destroyer's magazine. There might be, I don't know, some glitch and the ship just gets disabled or something. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that can happen in war. And it's just a waste of resources, as he would put it. It's a waste of men. It's a waste of material. It's a waste of ships, of time. And he just doesn't really understand unnecessary warfare. And it's kind of interesting because Thrawn is also very naive, because he didn't understand why he was punished for saving the people instead of the gas, because he just couldn't understand people who don't think the way he does. He doesn't understand politics at all, because he can't understand people behaving in such an irrational and selfish manner. The Chiss are very, I guess you could say, cold and kind of calculating people, but they're also a very moral people. They're also very uncorrupt and I guess kind of Puritan people. They put the kind of the greater good first. and they really don't like fighting unless it's absolutely necessary. You can kind of see this in Thrawn. And Thrawn kind of later says there's kind of a analog to Thrawn on the rebel side, Night Swan, who's very similar to him but serving an opposite cause. And they have immense respect for each other. And Thrawn says part of why he believes he needs to become a Grand Admiral and to kind of rise up the military chain is so he can be in command of a huge fleet instead of someone else who wouldn't have respect for human life like he does. Also, he believes that when the Emperor dies, and the Emperor is kind of a crippled old man, that he can play a role in selecting the next leader of the Empire. In Thrawn, I don't know if he wants to lead the Empire, but he wants someone who is competent but not sadistic or corrupt. I mean, he acknowledges that the Emperor is corrupt, etc. But he believes that he'll die soon, and he can play a role in choosing someone who's, once again, a strong leader who will provide stability to the galaxy, but someone who's not a sociopath. And that's kind of, Thrawn believed very much in order. He believed very much in hierarchy, in merit, and he very much didn't like I guess kind of the individualism of the rebels. He didn't like all these people going in their own directions, going off in their own ways, just not being unified around a common good. So he did ideologically agree with a lot of the Empire. He also despised the pettiness, the corruption, the incompetence, the inefficiency, and the cruelty of the system. I believe at one point he states that he really doesn't like slavery, as Eli doesn't. So we have in Thrawn a character who's basically lawful good in terms of his morality and his actions, but is serving a deep, I suppose you could say, a deeply flawed galactic government, and who is the government that we're supposed to hate, the government that's supposed to be the evil, as it were. Now, I think there is one other thing I'd like to get into before we end this. And that is, I wanted to talk a bit, and I should have done in the beginning, about the Emperor Majorian. Now, Majorian was the last Roman emperor of any real talent. He was the last Western Roman Empire who stood any chance of restoring what was lost. In the History of Rome podcast, they referred to Majorian as trying to take it all back. He was an ambitious man who believed that with proper leadership, good military leaders, and the will, that the Western Empire could reverse its inevitable decline. And he made a good go of it. He cleaned up corruption, he made things more efficient, he rebuilt the Roman military. And bursting out of Italy, he succeeded in reconquering much of Gaul. He reconquered all of Spain, and he was just bulldozing barbarian kingdom after barbarian kingdom. Ultimately, though, he was betrayed, and the Western Roman Empire had put a huge fleet together, and the fleet was going to invade North Africa. And the fleet was, once they retook North Africa is kind of hard to invade by barbarians in general because it's in the middle of nowhere and you need ships to get there. The Vandals were just kind of lucky. But B, it was the breadbasket of the Western Roman Empire. It would dramatically relieve a lot of the economic, social, and logistical problems that the Western Roman Empire was having, and it would basically make the Mediterranean into a Roman lake once more. But the Vandals paid a group of people who burned down the ships, and Majorian, basically at that point, he was screwed. They had lost an entire massive fleet, and one of his lieutenants killed him because he wanted to be emperor and he wanted power. And with the death of Majorian, the Western Roman Empire lost any real hope of ever reforming itself and ever really being able to recover from its terminal decline. And in the original Thrawn trilogy, that's very much the role he plays. He's really, post-Palpatine, the only Imperial leader who stands any chance of actually restoring the Empire. Now there's people like Zinji or Isard or any number of other people who are able to put together a military big enough to defeat the rebels or perhaps restore the imperial territory. But all they would have had was a military dictatorship that would have lasted the duration of their lives. And maybe not even that long, and it would have collapsed. Under Thrawn, you saw a real possibility of a new galactic order, a new way of doing things, a reformed empire that had shed a lot of the things that caused its collapse and had really kind of become a true alternative to the Republic that would have won the loyalty of its citizens through deeds and good government rather than just through fear. And when he died, largely betrayed by the people who surrounded him, it was the end of any hope of the Empire ever getting back together. And shortly after his death, you have Operation Shadowhand, in which that and the Battle of Coruscant, basically the remains of the Imperial Navy completely destroyed themselves. And Thrawn was kind of the last possible political leader who could have restored the Empire. And in the aftermath of that, the remains of the Imperial military were permanently destroyed and would never again be able to challenge the New Republic. So Thrawn is very much the Empire's Majorian. He's a tragic figure who, had he been given just a little more time and more of a chance to perform, he could have done truly great things. He could have truly changed the course of the galaxy. But as it was, he succeeded in winning numerous victories, some of the most impressive victories in galactic history, and conquering, I think he reconquered like a third of the galaxy or some huge amount, and almost brought the New Republic to its knees, only to be brought down by treason and infighting. So, Thrawn is the Empire's Majorian. He's a truly fascinating character, and he will continue, I think, to be probably the most beloved Star Wars character until people stop being fans of the series. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I probably should have said the Majorian thing at the beginning, but nothing I can do. It is what it is, but I digress.